Did you know that over 80% of businesses that go to market never actually sell? And for many business owners, their business is their number one asset. Yet when it comes time to exit, they often discover how challenging it is to find the right buyer. But the good news is this: with the right strategies, the team in place, and the information that you need to make better decisions, you can avoid these pitfalls and position your business for a successful sale. So, if that's you, stick around right now. We've got Kathryn Guthrie, a certified exit planning advisor and seasoned entrepreneur with years and years of experience helping business owners just like you buy, build, and sell their companies. So, before we jump into it, hit that like and subscribe button. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. We'll get to them. But without all that said, good morning, Kathryn.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks
How
for
are you
having
this morning?
me. Really well.
Awesome. So let's just get into this. In terms of setting some perspective, Kathryn, how often do you see businesses fail to sell?
So in our market, we're working in the lower middle market and the Main Street market, which is where almost 80 to 90% of businesses reside. That's people with under 100 employees. Um, in that group, 70 to 80% of businesses fail to transact when they go to market. This isn't even just people who decide not to sell. These are the people who decide to sell. They can't get a transaction completed.
Now, with all your experience that you guys have, there has to be some patterns to this. What are some of those specific patterns that stand out to you?
So selling a business is really all about managing risk. You have
Okay.
to have something that's transferable to another person or entity, and that business also has to be something that they couldn't build themselves for the same price. So really it's about managing risk. And for most small businesses, where they fail is basic formalization. So having some kind of a structure with their SOPs, having good books, having reasonable expectations of value on the part of the owner, having um, im- having a lack of customer concentration. So a lot of really small businesses with just a few employees are like, wow, we're making great money, but they have two really huge customers. That
Yeah.
may not be transferable to another business owner.
Now, on the flip side, now customer centric is obviously the problem. The other side is that owner centric side, where obviously, which you and I spoke about just before we came on, about
Mhm.
Michael Gerber's book, The E Myth and the Technician. So many businesses are too reliant on their owners. How does an owner get out of that position?
So an owner is really going to have to grow out of that position.
Okay.
So all small businesses go through the startup phase where the owner does everything because there's one person and there's not enough money for another employee. But now with technology, there's
Right.
really some great ways to take some of that burden off the owner so that they can focus a little bit more on gaining new skills. One of those ways would be using offshore resources for administrative support or accounting, and learning how to, it's not just turning things over to an employee, it's learning how to turn those over and create the systems that they need so they have visibility and they can see whether or not something's going wrong. If you don't have any way to check quality or to check that things are correct, owners have a really hard time letting go because they're the only ones that can do it and they don't trust other people, but they don't trust because they don't have visible work and they can't see.
Kathryn, I mean, so there's a lot in that. Systems and processes.
Mhm.
There's, the technician. And once again, we kind of joked about this before we got on, is that I'm ex-professional and I feel like I can do a better job. So I go start my own business. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a business owner. And if I'm wearing all the hats, who do I turn to, or who can I turn to learn some of the business operation standpoint, or operations and systems and processes that I need to grow? I mean, where do I go?
So right now, I think there's really a hard place, especially with smaller businesses in the marketplace, to get those skills. I think the first thing that people need to do is become a student. You and I discussed that a little bit before. Reading books, even if those books aren't directed at your market segment, can help you get the philosophies in mind. For instance, Dan Sullivan's Who Not How.
Great book.
That is a great book for an owner who's trying to get out of their own way, because it gets them thinking about the concept of, the getting away from those really expensive words. I can do it myself. Those are probably the five most expensive words that a business owner can utter,
Right.
because they don't have those skills. So now I've got a business owner who's learning how to create a website instead of going out and making money, right? So Who Not How says, hey, find somebody to make that website. And it's a real philosophy change for a lot of owners. So I think that reading is the number one step that business owners can take. And then finding resources. And you're going to have to really look, because there's not a lot of them out there right now, for advice for small business owners. A place that people can go is the Small Business Development Corporation. That is under the SBA umbrella, so the
Hmm.
Small Business Administration, and it's free advice to business owners. They can go in and register at their local land grant college. They can then work with an SBDC advisor. The hardest part there is that the advisor isn't going to provide you proactive direction. They're going to come in and say, hey, what do you need from me? So if a business owner knows that they need to formalize their accounting and they need to learn how to read a profit and loss, they can go to SBDC and get help, but they have to know that information first.
So there's SCORE is an
Yeah,
organization.
that's an affiliated, like all agencies. They have some redundancy and some overlap in the programs. SCORE is retired executives
Okay.
from companies who will come in and volunteer their time to be a mentor. But again, they're not going to come in and diagnose the problems in your business like maybe a business coach or a formal advisor or an exit advisor is going to do. They're going to come in and say, hey, what can I help you with today? Are you having trouble with your sales? Are you having trouble with your prospecting? Are you having trouble with HR management? How can I come alongside you and share my experience?
But those resources, and I learned about SCORE going through my MBA program. SCORE, I think, is one of the most underutilized resources to business owners that they have that they don't even know about.
Absolutely. So these all of these organizations, SBDC and SCORE, are, you can only use them if you go find them.
Right.
So putting that out on uh, a show like this, I think, is a really good idea, because it gives some small business owners the idea that those free resources do exist, and all it takes is reaching out and taking advantage of those.
No, I appreciate that. And like I said, this is one of those tangents that we went off, Kathryn.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you mentioned a little bit ago, right? There's the customer kind of centric. This is hard when you rely on a customer that has so much revenue, let's say, or a handful of customers, other than building a sales force, which may or may not be possible. How does an owner get out of that kind of spiral of having that customer centric position, and what does that do to sellability?
So a customer centric, if you have a customer concentration,
Okay.
and this happens a lot of times when somebody has a skill set and they leave an organization, the organization says, well, great, well, let's contract with you. We still want your services. And now that's the number one largest customer, and they can completely fill the time of that owner, right? So now
Mhm.
you're making great money, but you're stuck with this one really large customer and maybe a few side jobs, that's great, but your exit plan looks different from something like that. I can't sell that to another human being or another entity. The exit plan, if you want to stay that way, is to make as much money as you can and invest it in other assets,
Mhm.
so that when you're ready to retire, you have sufficient assets to maintain your lifestyle, right? So That's a valid exit strategy. You don't have to sell your business. But if you have a customer concentration and you really want to grow away from that, you're going to have to get strategic in your thought process. So I'll give you an example from our past. Stuart and I were property managers, and we had 600 single family homes. Well, that doesn't sound like a customer concentration because, it's by 400 individual owners, not that big a deal. The problem was that we were concentrated on one product. And so when the economy turned, there were two things at play. One, housing prices started rising, so people could sell these things that they've been holding on to since 2008. And the other thing that happened was because of the tax structure for how long you could hold a house as a rental before you would get taxed on it when you sold it, people were going, okay, we're at 5 years, we're done. So we went from 600 properties to 300 properties really quickly. So we were concentrated in the marketplace. So how could you diversify that? Well, we could have taken on apartment complexes. By taking on apartment complexes, we would have stabilized our portfolio, because apartment complexes don't sell the way houses sell.
Right.
They don't sell for the same reasons. We also could have taken on HOAs. It's really the same skill set, but sometimes it's not about just diversifying against one customer. Sometimes it's about diversifying in the marketplace to hedge against changes in the economy and in the market.
But Kathryn, in that scenario though, I mean, just to be devil's advocate here.
Sure.
HOA, multi-family apartment complexes, and single family, those are, although they're in the same kind of umbrella and the management roughly the same, there are certain compliance needs that each one of them have that are distinctly different than the other. So wouldn't you still have to kind of broaden yourself, not only on operation standpoint, but systems and processes to manage an HOA? There's a lot of compliance to that.
Yeah. So we would have, in that particular circumstance, just like sharing my personal experience in property management, our software could have handled that.
Gotcha.
So as far as would we have had to learn some new skills? Yes, but they would have been adjacent skills. It wouldn't have been new skills. It would have been things we would apply knowledge we already had in a different way.
Understood.
So I think that you are talking about something that's really relevant is, hey, if you're going to expand product lines, if you're going to do other things, you are going to have to broaden your skill set. So if we're talking about going from a solopreneur to going to, and who's serving one major client, and this actually happened to my mom. My mom was a graphic artist. She got a really big account with a dress designer, and the dress designer worked with her for 3 or 4 years and then looked her in the eye and said, you can come on board and be an employee, or I'm going to find somebody else to do this.
Wow.
And that was like 90% of her business. So she's like, well, I guess I'm going to be an employee. I guess that's my plan, right?
Right.
So it was very interesting to watch her go through that. So what would she have had to do to get away from that? Well, one of the things that she could do would be to get rid of all of the administrative chores that she's doing as a solopreneur, so that she would have time to serve additional customers. And there's so many resources now. We use, in part for our marketing currently, as advisory professionals, we're using a firm that does email marketing for us.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but you have to. Now I've got to remember 10X is the other Dan Sullivan book. I told you I'm a huge Dan Sullivan fan. But the 10X is easier than 2X. It's only easier if you keep the 20% where you are the critical factor and get rid of the 10% that you're not. That means you have to hire, you have to invest, you have to, and even if hiring looks like, Fiverr, and the I just lost a vocabulary word. I can't believe it. The Upwork,
Oh yeah.
kind of model. Even if you're just contracting people for the little parts where they have expertise and it's not 20 hours a week or 80 hours a week, they're just helping you do the things that aren't your best 20%. That's a way that you get out of that, because you can't grow if you're working 60 hours a week.
Right. And I think that's a kind of a great transition,
Mhm.
Kathryn, to kind of start talking about, how does a business owner kind of prepare? And so the easiest question, or the beginning question, is, when should they start preparing for an exit?
Oh, so the vision part, which we find people are frequently missing, needs to be from the very beginning. Why are you starting your own business? Where do you hope to be at the end of this?
Okay.
And then just that basic idea. What is it that you want at the end of this journey? Because the business is just a vehicle.
Right.
It's
Right.
not, it's not your identity. It's not all of these other things that we allow it to become. It's just a vehicle for you to get from where you are today to where you want to be at the end of your journey. And so I think that visioning starts way at the beginning, but good planning for exit is really just good business strategy. So you should be, when you're thinking, I am overwhelmed and we're not at our destination yet. How do I get from here to there? And you're starting to talk to coaches and read books and um, you know take advice. That's really where your planning starts, because formalizing your business, formalizing your bookkeeping, adding employees, having set roles in your business, even that if those roles, if one person is filling multiple roles, knowing what those roles are and how they interact with each other, those are all really important parts of having a business that's just fun to run, that's
Right.
not torturing you. So once you're in the not tortured phase, you should really be looking at 3 to 5 years ahead. So about 3 to 5 years before you think you're going to arrive at your destination, you need to really be working on making sure that you're de-risking and you're making things transferable to other humans, and being ready to exit, because there's no perfect business.
Right.
Everything that we talk about is ideals. Don't let anybody be more than 10% of your business. Well, that's a good rule. But sometimes we have businesses where the customer's 15%, but they have 100 other customers. Well,
Oh,
okay, that's great, but that doesn't mean it's not saleable. That just means it's a little riskier and somebody might not be willing to pay you best in class price, right?
right. Now, you mentioned that there's a lot of things that we've covered, right? There's the owner-centric, there's client concentration, systems and processes, and some of these things that owners may not know, and once they start to learn, they might not see the value in them. So how do you convey that all of these little things create the value of a business to optimize that sale?
So when I'm talking to business owners, I always talk about risk.
Okay.
So and everything is related. So a system is as good as its parts, but the parts are only good if they're working together,
Hmm.
right? So when a buyer is looking at your business, if your plan is to sell your business, you have to look at it through that lens of a buyer. And buyers are going to put out a lot of money, even if it's in the form of debt. Even if I put, $100,000 down and I'm buying $1 million business, I'm taking on $1 million of debt in this, or $900,000 of debt in this $1 million business. That is a really huge risk. So you're
Right.
already talking to somebody who's stepping out on the tightrope.
Right.
And so when they're looking at your business, they're looking at it from a SWOT perspective. What are the strengths of this business? What are the weaknesses of the business? What are the opportunities? And where am I going to get the wind out of my sails?
Yeah.
Right? So Um, and the basic ones are: how essential is the owner to the goodwill of the business? So if the owner has contact with every client, every vendor, they do all the work themselves, how much risk does that add to this transaction when that owner is leaving? How many customers will I lose?
Right.
How much goodwill will I lose? Can that owner go out and compete with me even though he has an NDA? So um, those are really salient points for a buyer. But the other thing they're looking at, like with customer concentration, it's if that one big customer, because every change, a good change or a bad change, creates
Right.
instability. So when I come in here, we don't have any idea whether that really large customer was on the cusp of leaving. We don't know whether they really have only stuck with the business for this long because they felt some sense of responsibility to the previous owner. They've been doing business together for 20 years. So if you've got a customer who's, let's say, 30% of your business, which, it's not uncommon,
Yeah.
if that customer leaves and you have a $900,000 loan and they're responsible for 30% of your revenue and 15% of your profit because you've been giving them a discount all these years, that's going to be a major blow that could stop you from being able to make your loan payments. So everything that we look at is about risk management. Is what can we do to make this less risky for a buyer coming in and transitioning to new management?
Interesting. And one of the things that struck me right there is you mentioned about the parts, and I don't do very well with repeating quotes or anything, but having the parts work together. That was what I got out of that.
Yeah,
How important is it for you guys to have a team of professionals working with you to make sure that things are running smoothly with clients and they're optimizing their business for that sale?
yeah. When we are optimizing for a sale, having a list of professional advisors, or having, I shouldn't say a list, because if they're not doing anything, it's not helpful. We need a
Right.
team of professional advisors who are engaged. So I'll give you an example of one where we should have had a professional advisor involved and we did not. We were selling a fencing company, and they got to the closing table and realized that with the taxes and the transaction costs, that they weren't going to have enough money to invest at the end of the transaction to meet their personal goals.
Oh, wow.
So that was back in the beginning of my career with this. What did we learn? Well, we need to get the financial advisors involved early. The owner has to have a clear understanding of what it is that they need, what it is the transaction can produce. And then we have tax advisors that we work with who are transaction, who are very versed in transaction taxation. We also have advisors. I always tell people, look, I'm not a lawyer. And while my standard contract is great and I'm pretty confident in that, if we're starting to write additional conditions into this contract, and even if we don't, you should have your lawyer read it. He doesn't have
Right.
to rate it, but have him look through it and make sure that this is indeed in your best interest and he
Right.
doesn't see anything that you need. So we work with a legal team, we work with accounting, we work with financial advisors, we work with tax advisors. Having that team, and the bigger the transaction, so on $100,000 transaction, we should have the financial advisor and their accountant and maybe a lawyer. But there's not much to tax there, so we don't really need to get the tax guy involved. But as the transactions get larger, especially as we get into million and multi-million dollar transactions, the team gets a little bit bigger. And owners sometimes perceive that as an expense, but a misstep is far more expensive than a lawyer.
Right. And and I talk about this with CPAs or with business owners a lot, is that they're just because their CPA does their taxes does not mean they're an actual tax planner.
No,
Like,
That is 100% true. And sometimes, and with CPA after the name, sometimes people are calling somebody a CPA who is a tax preparer, not a
yes.
CPA.
And
And we find it's very rare that CPAs are providing those fractional CFO services to their clients, which is unfortunate. I think it would be I think it would be better if some of these people had better advice. Some CPAs are great. They'll take a look at
yeah,
somebody in September and say, "Hey, you got a little extra money here. If you had a capital expenditure in mind, now would be the time to do that." Um, some of them are great with that or helping manage credit, but a lot of times people aren't talking to their CPAs until it's time to prepare their taxes, and it's a little bit late there for a CPA to help you out as well.
right.
So I guess my advice is talk to all your advisors earlier.
Right. And Kathryn, this is the thing. Make sure that they are what you need. I mean, I've had a lot of people reach out to me, partners, and say, "Hey, I've got a client that needs a CPA." And my response is, "For what? Like, what are they looking to achieve?" "Well, they need to reconcile their books." "Okay, well, that's a bookkeeper."
Right,
Right? "Well, they need strategy on growth." "Well, that's a CFO." Right? And I'm not, to your point, I'm not saying a CPA can't do those functions, but there's a large majority of them that don't have that skill set. So if you need something specific, go hire that niche person, that fractional CFO, because there's fractional everything these days.
yeah, which is
But
great.
yeah, but don't think your CPA is a be all end all.
Right,
Understand their role, interview them. I don't care if you've been with them for 20 years. Interview them to make sure that they're meeting your needs. And then from there, make a decision. Do I keep them? Do I not? If you keep them, great. Go hire a tax planner that'll work with your CPA.
right. I think that's what people don't understand is that these professionals can work together for your good. But the other thing is I think is really hard, and you're just giving me an idea for one of our next formalization classes,
Yes.
um, is hey, what do you need to know about these different disciplines and how do you interview for those? Because it's hard. Somebody says, well, you need a CPA, and they go out and they go, let's see, there's a CPA after their name. My friend knows them. This is great. I'm going to
Right.
use that because they think that's a generic term, but
Right.
they don't know the differences. So I think a great class would be, hey, who's on your team at what stage? So when you're a solopreneur, you should have a bookkeeper and somebody who does your taxes. It could be a CPA, it could be a tax preparer. But as you grow, you need to change your professionals. And I think that's something that business owners are really uncomfortable with. Hey,
Right.
I've been with the same CPA for 20 years. That's really comfortable. It's an intimate relationship, and I don't really know why I wouldn't use them.
Which is interesting, Kathryn, because most of them talk to their CPAs in that scenario once, maybe twice a year. So
Yeah.
how is that really a friendship or an intimate relationship? You barely talk to the person.
Yeah, but they know all the stuff.
Uh,
They know all
It's
the secrets.
it's data, and
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing. Kathryn, I want to obviously be cognizant of your time. We could certainly go on and on about this. Any final thoughts on working with business owners either to prepare for a sale or the strategies to actually help grow their company?
Yeah, my biggest advice is make use of that advisor network. If you're short on cash and you don't want to pay for advisors, I understand you get what you get, but there are free resources where people can give you good basic advice. It may not be tailored to your business, like SBDC. Score would be more tailored to you, but find some resources and start thinking about these things early and think of it from a perspective of risk. What can I do to reduce the risk for somebody who's buying my business to ensure that they get what they pay for?
Awesome. Kathryn, thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, Kathryn's information will be below. Kathryn, you are licensed in California and Nevada.
Correct.
So if there's anybody outside of those states, reach out to us. We're happy to connect you. with Kathryn and her team or somebody else. Actually, I'm going to leave Score's link in the bottom in the description below. So please check out Score. But thank you, Kathryn, for your time. Really appreciate you being here.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.